The caller mentioned David Ferdoso's book. Will you be taking the same type of analysis of it?
Yeah, we've started to look at that, and there are some things in there apparently that can be called into question. I'm sure we're going to be doing more stuff about that as time goes on, and other people will too. And I think that's perfectly appropriate. I mean, I write books about politics, and I think it's absolutely fine for people to examine the things that I write and see if they're true. You know, I mentioned the book that David Brock and I wrote, Free Ride, about John McCain and the media. When we wrote that, we not only fact-checked it ourselves, but we even contracted with a research firm to come and do their own independent fact-check of it to see if our fact-checking was correct. Because we knew that there was a good chance that somebody out there was going to do a similar sort of thing, go through it, see if we had gotten anything wrong. That's because we try to be as careful as we possibly can. I think that Mr. Corsi didn't seem to care much about how careful he was being.
What was the argument of your book?
Well, our argument was essentially, you can sum it up on the title, Free Ride, that John McCain has gotten a free ride. And I think that everybody, really across the political spectrum, will acknowledge that there's been no politician in Washington who's been more of a favorite of the press over the last decade, or decade and a half maybe, than John McCain has. It's a subject that it has a lot of nuance to it. There are a lot of different reasons why he became the press's favorite. And so when we began to think about it, which was really about 2006, we thought, well, this is a subject that requires an entire book. You couldn't do it in an article or something short. So we did a lengthy investigation looking at how he's been portrayed in the media over the years and what kinds of things he's done to get the press on his side. It's been an extraordinarily effective campaign. No politician understands reporters better than John McCain does.
And does it take a look at the war record and things of that issue, or are there other things that you examined?
Well, we didn't sort of try to find if there were any skeletons in John McCain's closet. That really wasn't what it was about. Our book is about looking at how he's been portrayed. But you know, the war record is actually a fascinating aspect of how he's been portrayed and what kind of role that plays in how reporters look at John McCain. So, for instance, you find literally thousands of times over the years reporters dropping in the fact that he was a prisoner of war, even when it has no relationship to what they're actually talking about at the time. You know, John McCain, who was a prisoner of war in Vietnam, today gave a speech on the economy. And you're thinking, what does that have to do with anything? And yet at the same time, what's really interesting is they're always attesting to the idea that John McCain is really reluctant to talk about Vietnam, when, in fact, he talks about it all the time. And, you know, that's his right. It's his history. He can talk about it as much as he wants, but he puts it in his campaign ads. He talks about it on the stump. And yet, nonetheless, reporters are always saying he's so modest and so full of integrity that he doesn't like to talk about it. And when anybody, you know, when Wesley Clark said something perfectly obvious, that the fact that he was a POW doesn't necessarily qualify him to be president, the media really circled the wagons around McCain, and there was this outrage that how dare Clark even say such a thing, that the fact that he was a POW doesn't qualify him to be president. I mean, you would have thought that Clark had accused him of being a child molester or something. So that was just one interesting kind of example of what sort of a role his POW story and what he went through 40 years ago plays in the way that he's discussed today.
On our line for those who support others, Montgomery, Alabama.
Good morning, gentlemen. Mr. Waldman, thank you so very much for being on air. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. Down here in Montgomery, there's a program that comes on in the morning here called Good Morning Montgomery. And it's hosted by two very conservative white guys. And they, like you're describing this treatment of John McCain, they put out there every morning some kind of way because they're supporting him because of his military experience and because of his fine war record. Well, I did some research myself on the internet, and like the previous caller said, you know, in the old days you could depend on CBS, ABC, and NBC for the news. But now, if you sit and you wait and you just listen to what comes on MSNBC, ABC, CBS, all this litany of people, you have to actually really search and do your own investigative research yourself because you get crap. But anyway, why is it that there's absolutely no attention to the fact that there are veterans themselves who served with McCain during that era and what they say about him? Fox had a man that they called at one time their expert. He's a military man, supposed to be their expert that they went to on this incursion into Iraq. Colonel David Hackworth. This man has a distinguished record of being the only soldier we've had in history to earn 10 Silver Stars. So by anybody's account, he's a genuine hero. He questions McCain's service and how he actually earned his medals. There's another Colonel Earl Hooper. He has a video on the internet attesting to the fact that John McCain gave enemy secrets during the war.
Okay. Thanks, caller. Mr. Waldman.
Well, he was right when he talked about having to do your investigation. Most people just don't have time for that, and that's why, even in this incredibly complex world, we at Media Matters think it's still so important to keep track of what those big media sources are doing, because sometimes for those of us who are real political junkies, and I'm guessing most C-SPAN viewers are, those of us who love to watch 3 news programs and read 6 newspapers and read 100 blogs every day, we tend to forget that the average American doesn't do that. They've got a busy life, and where they get their news, they may watch the local news out of the corner of their eye while they're making dinner for their kids. And so what comes through to those big news sources is still incredibly important and has the biggest role in what people believe and what they know about the campaign. And so even though we keep track of all different kinds of media, from radio, television, magazines, newspapers, it's the media sources with the biggest audiences that still have an outsized impact on what people think, what they believe, and how they're going to act in the political world.
Erie, Pennsylvania. Good morning.
Good morning, gentlemen. I just have a quick comment regarding this black liberation theology discussed in Mr. Corsi's book. I've heard the tape of Reverend Wright blaming America for HIV/AIDS when we know, according to our own CDC, the facts are that is a sexually transmitted virus that is killing people, and sadly, more blacks. And we have information from the CDC also that blacks are engaging in sexual behaviors at higher rates than their white peers, so they're going to get more STDs. They also have 70% out-of-wedlock births, and that's the #1 cause of poverty. I think that the black liberation theology blaming whitey is actually doing harm. We're not discussing taking personal responsibility for these things. I mean, we have the solutions, and conservatives want to teach all youth, black, white, Hispanic, how not to engage in those behaviors. And we have Senator Obama actually saying, things like he would not want to punish his child with, having a baby. That's not a punishment. That, he would have aborted his grandchild.
Well, the whole Reverend Wright controversy was a very interesting episode in this presidential campaign. Now, the things that he said about AIDS, there's almost nobody who agrees with that. Senator Obama was quite clear that he disagreed with it. And one of the interesting things that happened is that when the Reverend Wright controversy came up, it was almost in some circles as though there were people who said, okay, now we finally got a way to go at him on the basis of race. I remember there was an article in the Politico, which has become a very influential website and newspaper here in Washington, that quoted a Republican consultant named Alex Castellanos saying, well, now we know that because we've seen Reverend Wright, now we know that Barack Obama is not Tiger Woods. Now, what does that mean? Well, he's not the non-threatening black man. He can be painted as a threatening black man. We can use this guy, even though the things that he says, we know that Obama doesn't actually believe those things. But we can use that to try to paint him as a threatening black man, as though he's Stokely Carmichael or something. And we saw that, we saw Reverend Wright turning up in ads from the North Carolina Republican Party. That particular consultant, Alex Castellanos, is somebody who was responsible for that infamous White Hands ad in the Jesse Helms race in 1990. So there are a whole cadre of people within the Republican Party and in conservative circles who are very, very skilled at this kind of racial politics. And interestingly enough, I saw a report the other day that Jerome Corsi is now going to be teaming up with Floyd Brown to produce some kind of a documentary against Barack Obama. And Floyd Brown is the person who created the Willie Horton ad. So you can see all of these strains kind of coming together. And again, Mr. Corsi seems so aghast that people are criticizing him and questioning his credibility, but yet he's going on white supremacist radio shows. He's teaming up with people like Floyd Brown. He has all of these, these bigoted statements that he posted on right-wing websites in the past, and he seems to be the person who's doing the most to undermine his own credibility.